All right, thank you for joining us today for another episode of Harnessing Contrast, the simple podcast where we discuss the small details that make high performers and powerful companies stick out from the pack. Today, we have the privilege of having Glenn Strebe on the podcast. Glenn is an Air Force Academy graduate with an MBA from Colorado State University. Glenn also has extensive experience in C-level disciplines. In addition to these achievements, Glenn is also an author and industry speaker with interest in organizational and human capital development, all while participating in long-distance races ranging from 200-mile bicycle races to Ironman triathlons. Let me assure our listeners that this is just a fraction of the very full and very impressive resume. Glenn, we appreciate you being on the show with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course. All right, so I've just prepared just a few questions for Glenn today. See if we can't glean some of his experience and expertise. We're just going to jump right into those, and we'll have some discussion between each question. But the first one I have prepared here is an organization called American CEO, and that's an organization that specializes in business consulting, has recently published what they feel are the 5 main responsibilities of a CEO. They are as follows: own the vision, communicate the vision, tie the vision to stakeholder goals, keep the vision fresh, and strike a balance between required optimism for the business and keeping the credibility to lead. So Glenn, as a seasoned CEO, what are your thoughts on this list?
I believe it's an outstanding list. And one of the things that I was most impressed with is it really starts with a vision. And as in any organization, when you start talking about vision, is what's aspirational? Where do you want to go as a company? And the CEO is always the keeper of that. And when I look at each one of these, own the vision, communicate, tie it back to stakeholder goals, and keep the vision fresh, strike a balance. I thought that was absolutely outstanding. And it's something I strive to be able to do in my organization where I work, as well as organizations where I'm on the board of directors. And in addition to that, anytime I'm helping other organizations, whether they're nonprofit organizations or for-profit companies, we always, as a CEO, and I would expand this a little bit and say the board of directors, if they have a board of directors, is responsible also. It's a joint effort between the board as well as the CEO and in many cases the senior staff. So I thought those five pieces or 5 responsibilities are very, very crucial. I would extend that, and if you can break it apart, you start talking about tying vision to stakeholder goals, and then ultimately working with your staff. And so the article talks, or I should say the 5 responsibilities, and the article talks about the vision. I would extend that and say you also have to engage all of your staff members to make sure that they follow the vision. Again, some of those pieces are broken out in that. So I thought it was a great piece, and definitely agree with it completely.
Awesome. Yeah, I thought it was a terrific list myself. But, I feel like a lot of these conversations about vision often happen behind closed doors. Maybe the people who are actually out doing the work on the line, they may not be involved in some of those conversations. So could you just share with us, how do you personally approach finding that vision and honing it down into action and words?
From a CEO perspective, one of the primary jobs of a CEO, and one of my primary responsibilities, is to be the visionary of the organization. And there's a couple of ways of doing that from if you want to call it a technical perspective. Every organization is a little bit different. And what I mean by that is from a structural standpoint. So you can imagine if somebody has a company that they're the owner, they don't have a board of directors, but they started up, whether it can be a variety of things. It can be a custom home builder. It can be a plumbing company. It can be an HVAC company. It can be a software company. If you're a CEO and you don't have a board of directors and it's just you, then you're going to spend a lot of time trying to think about where do you want to go? What is that 5-year, 10-year? And in some cultures, it's not uncommon to look out 50 years, which is, most people would say you really can't do that. But from a visionary standpoint, I truly believe that you can. So if you're a company that is, you're the sole owner, you don't have a board of directors, you're going to spend a lot of time really thinking about it, as well as working with your senior staff, if you have a senior staff, if you're a company that has a board of directors, the board of directors and the senior staff, as well as some of the possibly mid-level managers, depending on the size of the organization, really has to spend time together. And our approach to do that, and I can speak for Air Academy Federal Credit Union, our approach is we use a strategic planning process when we try to create vision for the organization. That strategic planning session is comprised of the board of directors, which are in our case are all volunteers, myself, of course, our senior staff, and we bring in mid-level managers, because when you talk about some of the things of trying to relate it back to the staff and getting buy-in in an organization, when people help create the vision, when they're part of the process, from the board of directors to mid-level managers, you get much more buy-in than for perhaps me and the board of directors getting together and then going in and telling everybody, well, here's the vision of the organization. By engaging more people, the better off you are ultimately for them to buy into the organization. And I always talk about things like vision becoming part of the DNA of the organization. That's how we do it. So our perspective is working together collaboratively amongst the board of directors, senior staff, and mid-level managers.
Okay. So would you say there's quite a bit of discussion then that takes place?
Yes. The vision for us, we don't do it every single year, because if you try to think about a vision, which is a long-term idea, long-term, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? That old classic skating to where the puck is one of the most important things that you can do. We'll talk about the vision and we'll revisit our vision every 3 to 5 years. If there's something that is major that happens in the industry, we might do it in 3 years. But if the industry is a little bit more steady as you go, then we'll do it on a 5-year basis, and we'll revisit and bring everybody involved in that process. And so we'll spend our strategic planning session is at least a day long. We'll start conversations at board meetings a month or two beforehand, and then we'll really go through the process and spend a few hours on it. But we've been thinking about it literally for months, and that's how we do that process.
Gotcha. So I mean, a lot of inexperienced individuals could express concerns like, well, why are we spending so much money and so much time on this vision if it's hard to see its direct relationship to the bottom line? Could you just speak to the value of having a vision compared to just worrying about a spreadsheet?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's when you have a vision, it should be aspirational. Where does this company want to go? Even, from a personal side, let me, to people that are watching this or listening to this, think about it on an individual basis, and then I'll translate it back into a company. On an individual basis, if you say, okay, well, I want to go to college. Fantastic. You're going to go to college. What are you going to go to college for? I don't know. Well, if you're going to go to college and you have no idea where you want to go, then every class is going to help get you there. The problem is where does that end? Just like I believe people should have personal visions, whether it's 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a business person. I want to be a business owner. Whatever it is, you have to have that personal vision, because it should be aspirational and it should help guide you in the decisions that you make every single day. Those decisions that you make every single day, every single month, every single year. If you translate that into what an organization should do, if you don't know where the organization is going and you don't know what's aspirational and what you want to accomplish, all roads are going to take you there. The problem is you're not going to know when you arrive. You're not going to know if you actually even pointed in the right direction. So just like you want to go somewhere individually, an organization should do the same thing and have that vision, so everybody in the organization can say, yes, I know what we're trying to do. I know what we're trying to accomplish. And of course, it should be aspirational. None of that I said has anything to do with financial pieces, has anything to do with a spreadsheet, how much money you're going to make as an organization, or even on an individual basis, how much money you're going to make individually with your own personal vision statement that you have. So it should be your guiding principle as an organization. And then the decisions that you make should transcend through the entire organization. That's why you do this.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's so misunderstood often between like, what's all this corporate hoopla vision stuff that we've got to read on a monthly
Yep.
basis?
Yep.
And that's
Mhm,
why, because it points
mhm.
the numbers too in the right direction, make sure people are
Yes.
focused on the right things.
Yes.
So the heart of the podcast is contrast. And so when you're
Mhm.
approaching these vision discussions, do you feel like you have an obligation to go against some sort of grain to make your organization stick out in some ways? Is that a focus at all?
Uh, From a vision standpoint, not necessarily.
Okay.
One of the things that is important, if it's aspirational and you know where you want to go, that's very valuable. But it gets to things such as sometimes people call it a mission statement, sometimes people call it a core purpose. And when you really drill down and say, how is it this organization can be significant? Maybe it goes against the grain and maybe it doesn't. But we should not purposefully be saying, well, we need to do something completely different, because sometimes what you've done can be successful. Now, I also agree that uh, what got you here won't get you there, as a possible consideration, but there are always going to be aspects that of things that you have done that are core principles of what you do that are going to stay the same. For example, through my lenses, I really talk about decision making from three particular segments. One, we're a membership based organization. That's what credit unions are. I'm always thinking about what's the right thing for the membership. Number two, I'm always thinking about what's the right thing for the employees. And number three, what's the right thing for the organization and its going concern. So all of the decisions I make, all of the things that I think about and do are with those three things in mind. And as a result of that, has it changed that? How do we, if we're looking out for employees, has that changed? People are people are people. While there's more diversity and there's differing thoughts out there, uh, the core principles of human beings doesn't really change that much. So my perspective is always try to look out for the employees. And so if you start saying, well, I'm going to go against the grain, okay, well, let's stop going against the grain. Would say employees don't really matter. I don't know of any organization that's been successful that the employees don't matter. If you
Yeah.
found one, I'd like to know of somebody who can say complete disregard for the employees
Yeah.
and they can be successful. So some of those core principles don't really change. What's the right thing for the customer? What's the right thing, in our case, members? What's the right thing for the employees? And what's the right thing for the organization? And if parts of that have to go against the grain, and here's an example with COVID, what recently happened is, from an employee standpoint, one of the turning points now is so many people, excuse me, so many people are working in a hybrid environment or they're working remotely. Prior to COVID, there were a lot of organizations that would absolutely refuse to allow that to happen. Well, I look at it and say, one of the things that has changed as an organization is, well, now we have to, when we consider the employees, it's slightly different, because now we have to think about, well, what is this organization going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when we have a workforce that might be in a hybrid work environment or have some remote opportunities. And so that's the type of thing that the basic needs of humans, the basic needs of principle of people, that hasn't really changed, but how you execute that can. And so those are the types of things that we have to think about. Am I going against the grain? Not necessarily. There are some companies that say everybody's coming back. Okay. So if we said that we're going to do hybrid, maybe that is going against the grain. But if you purposefully seek, change for the sake of change, generally speaking, that might be problematic. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't have brainstorming sessions and great ideas and things that are a big darn deal, but get back to core fundamentals of people, the business, as well as your customer.
Right. Okay. So if I'm understanding you correctly, then a lot of the contrast that you do want to create is in the quality of your execution of the vision.
Yes,
You don't
absolutely.
necessarily need to have a vision that's just way out there.
Vision without execution is hallucination.
Oh
And
yeah.
so, and you've probably heard that before. So you can have a vision, but if you don't execute and if you don't find ways to execute, It's just a hallucination.
I like that. I haven't heard that phrase before.
Okay.
I think that's pretty cool.
Okay.
I'm probably going to
Okay.
use that all over the place now. I think that's
Yes.
terrific.
Vision without execution is hallucination.
Yeah, definitely. Well, awesome. We're going to change gears just a little bit
Okay.
here. We've talked a lot about vision, and I really appreciate your thoughts on that. That's terrific.
Okay.
The next segment here, Salesforce, the
Mhm.
organization behind one of the most powerful CRMs of our day, has recently
Mhm.
said that leadership in business can be boiled down to three different styles. We have the autocratic leader, the democratic leader, and the laissez-faire leader. Essentially, those just kind of break down into leaders that make choices for everyone. And then there's the leader that wants to vote on everything. And then the leader that is very hands off and allows the team to lead itself. When you approach training your leadership team, be it your senior leadership team, your mid level managers, what style of leadership do you push in your organization and encourage?
Yes.
All the
Yes.
above?
All the
Terrific.
above. Different circumstances require different leadership styles. Now, some people, I've been asked before, hey, Glenn, what's your leadership style? And uh, I have a very simple answer. It depends, because every situation is very, very different. An organization, and historically, I'm a lot more on the democratic side with a little bit of laissez-faire, because there are differences. And let me give you an example of all of those. So let's start with the democratic side. One of the things that I believe is really important, one of my personal vision statement is to be that guy. I want 20 years from now somebody to say that, 20 years ago, I was talking to this guy and he helped point me in this direction. And I became a CEO, I became a VP, I became a business owner because some of the conversations that we had. I want to be that guy. And so that's my personal vision statement. And the measurement is how many people can I help go down the road? Well, what happens, go down the road in a good way. Well, what happens is everybody and every circumstance is a little bit different. So let's just use the democratic side. For people to grow and develop, they have to be put in places where they have to work with people, they have to engage people in leadership principles to help influence them, to help guide them, and for them to see how that should work. In other words, there are times that I have to help model what a democratic process is going to be, where you get input from everybody. We also have to recognize that sometimes just because we say you're getting input does not mean that what you say is what we're going to do. When people provide input, I look at it and say, I've heard you, I've listened, but I might not do what you say. Because if you have 10 people signed up or lined up and they all give you what their opinions are, you might have a kind of an amalgamation or a combination of a couple of different ones, but I'm pretty sure that somebody, you're going to have to say no to somebody. So on the democratic side, I think it's very valuable, and people can learn and grow and how to incorporate and engage people to do that. So there are times that is very valuable, and on a kind of a day-to-day basis, that probably makes complete sense that when you're not under a time crunch, you can use the democratic approach. Democratic approach often is a little bit slower because you want to get the input and then you process and then you go back and you loop it back and create a feedback loop. So democratic process, I like doing that in many cases. But a laissez-faire side, there are some people out there that are developing leaders. And sometimes developing leaders, it's pretty simple. You say, Dustin, here's what I need you to do. I'm going to tell you the what, and then you are going to have to figure out the how. Because if I tell you how, then, geez, I can get 10 people, I can tell them how to do something. So a laissez-faire approach, there are times and there are leaders, and oftentimes these might be a little bit more seasoned leaders, or when I say leaders, mid-level managers that want to aspire to senior staff, or senior staff that want to aspire to being a CEO. You take a laissez-faire approach because sometimes you have to say, figure it out. And the example would be is, as a CEO, there is no guide to procedures on how to be a CEO.
Right.
Almost
Yeah.
everything that you do, you have to figure it out.
Yeah.
Well, as a senior staff, if you're, in our case, if you're a teller, we tell you exactly what to do. We even tell you that you really need to smile, you need to treat people with respect and dignity, and there's all these things you need to do. We tell you what to do. As you increase, as you go up the ladder, if you want to call it the corporate ladder, there's a point in time that there are no uh, how-to guides to do this, and you have to figure it out. So I'll take a
Right.
laissez-faire approach on somebody that is a developing leader that wants to just say, go to the next step. Because remember, I want to be that guy. They want to go to the next step. And I will say, here's the what. You have to figure out the how. And I'll be here as a resource if you need it, but I want you to figure that out. For some people, they don't like that because some people are very, I need step A, B, C, D. And if you truly need step A, B, C, D, then you might not become the leader that can operate in a chaotic world or a world that has a lot of ambiguity in it. So, but there are people out there that I can say, here's what I want you to do. Go get it done. Let me know how it plays out. And then I'm going to feedback loop that and say, what did you learn? What went well? What went poorly? Grade yourself, and then on to the next thing. So that's the democratic piece and the laissez-faire. The autocratic piece, I've been a CEO for 24 years. There are times that I have been I mean, autocratic is a nice word for essentially dictatorship. And there have been times that I've said, this is what we're doing, period. And let me give you a perfect example of that. In March 2020, the world might have changed just a little bit. Remember, there's
Just
a
a
little
little.
thing, just a little bit.
Something was going around.
Yeah, there was a thing. And I met with, we're actually meeting about 3 times a week as a senior staff, but in the first meeting, and one of my favorite little sayings, Glennisms, as I call them, unestablished expectations is the foundation of disappointment. Unestablished expectations is the foundation of disappointment. Met with senior staff and I said, we're going to have to move quickly. We're going to be doing things that are fast. Whatever the virus, it's going to evolve. All of these things are going to change. So during this time, I said, you are going to see me as the dictatorial leader. And yes, I might ask you for your opinion, but we probably won't process. It's tell me what you think, and then I'm going to decide. And I established the expectation with them saying, during this time, we're in crisis mode. We transition our organization in 8 days from a 100% in-office organization to all of the support people being able to work remotely. Now, of course, the teller has you can't be a remote teller from home, kind of like you can't be a remote pilot from home.
Yeah.
But during that time, 8 days. I'm not going out and say, well, let me think about this for a couple of days, or you all form a committee. I was a very autocratic leader during the initial phases, probably about the first 30 to 45 days of COVID as we were transitioning our entire organization. So to answer your question, in an organization, you might start out as one of those 3 types of leaders. There's a lot of military folks out there, and I have a military background, that take a very autocratic approach. And they say that the beatings will continue until morale improves, or I have this rank on my shoulder, and this is what you're going to do, and I'm just going to tell you. And they might start as autocratic, but over the course of time, the situational awareness is there are times that you need to be autocratic, just like I did at the beginning of COVID. There are times that you can be democratic, which is a majority of the time, but also realize that it's a democracy, but you still have other people. I mean, so there's could be people that say, here's what we think we should do. And I'm going to say, no, that doesn't really bode well long term. Like every time they come up with something, I say no. Doesn't really work for a democratic approach. But there are times that you need to do that, and there are times that you need to do laissez-faire. So as you grow and develop as a leader, the effective leader is not one of those, but is a blend of all 3. And the most important thing, has the emotional intelligence to recognize when they need to do any one of the 3 for various situations. And when I talk about that, sometimes you go from one meeting that's democratic to another meeting that is laissez-faire to another meeting that is autocratic, all in the span of a day. So being able to have that flexibility and operate in an environment of ambiguity is critically important to the success.
Yeah,
Long answer to a
absolutely.
pretty short question. Can't be any one of the three. Has to be a
No,
blend. Successfully, if you want to be successful, you have to be able to find ways for each of the three in the appropriate settings.
right. You gotta be a chameleon. You gotta make sure that you're
Yes.
matching the room.
Yes. Yep.
And it's interesting too when you start looking at various studies of productivity and how much a team can accomplish and their morale. And then you look at the leadership style that's involved, the department that they're in. There's a tremendous relationship there. Um, and it can be difficult sometimes when one manager is really stuck in one way of leading and they're trying to make
Mhm.
other managers do the same thing, but the circumstances really aren't catering to that approach.
Mhm.
I think that's pretty interesting. When you go to start hiring senior management, mid-level managers, have you ever been really impressed with a resume but rejected a candidate because they appeared to be stuck in a certain leadership style?
Absolutely. And um, one of the ways of looking at it is throughout an organization, there are different types of people that respond better or worse to various types of leadership. Sometimes in an organization, there are people that are very process oriented. They go from here to here to here, and this is what they do all the time, forever. And a lot of times you just have to tell them what to do and then they execute. That could be a little bit more on the autocratic side. Sometimes people don't want to participate. And so personalities, and when I say personalities, you can have perhaps an accounting department that thinks very differently than somebody that is customer facing or a group that is customer facing. And so you're going to have to use somebody that you're going to have somebody that has the right type of leadership style. So you might have somebody that is incredibly impressive, and I've seen this before, incredibly impressive, the right academic backgrounds, the right leadership backgrounds, but they might, and they were really good in group A, but they were applying for group B, a different type, where a different type of leader is needed. So you look at it and say, if I were hiring for this, for group A type leadership, fantastic. But they didn't have the awareness that they're really good in that. And so they applied for another job. And sometimes they apply for another job because it pays more or they think it brings more stature. And then you end up saying no. So what that tells you is, or what I'm saying is, there are instances where the most talented person on paper, their background in leadership and how they work with people and collaborate with people is not a really good match. And therefore, you end up hiring somebody that is a good match. I've had people say, I can't believe I didn't get hired. I was the most qualified. And I would say, yes, you were the most qualified for this position over here. You were going for this position. You're not the most qualified in some of the soft skills that are necessary for you to be successful. I don't want you to go over there and then find out you hate it and then find out that you have to leave the organization because your job was backfilled that you really enjoyed before. So yes,
Right.
that is certainly true, and that spreads across all types of levels. There are CEOs, certain types of CEOs operate a certain way, and when I look at what some organizations, what they're looking for in a CEO, sometimes they're looking for people that are pretty technically oriented, and then sometimes they're people that are we want you to be the face of the organization. You're going to be in public. You're going to be you need to be charismatic. You need to be able to speak in front of groups. And so sometimes organizations, even in the C-suite, they look for a specific type of person because they might say, well, our entire supporting cast is outstanding, but we need the type of leader that is charismatic, that can rally people, that can somewhat be a cheerleader and help bring the group along because we have a whole bunch of folks that are very process oriented. And so they'll look for different types of people. And I've seen that happen often also.
Hmm. You mentioned soft skills. I think that's a really interesting topic.
Mhm.
Um, I'm sure many times in your experience, I've had this experience myself with my team, but a leader will emerge despite not having a title.
Oh gosh, yes.
And their resume may not be impressive yet. Maybe they're young, maybe
Mhm.
they haven't had a chance given to them, but they may be leading the team in a stronger way, morale wise, culturally speaking, better than maybe the titled supervisor or manager. How often do you let, that emotional intelligence, picking up on those soft skills, how often will you take a chance on somebody like that that may not have a strong resume, but is clearly has leadership potential?
We do that all the time because, I mean, if you're looking for somebody technical, that's one thing. But if you're looking for somebody that is going to become a leader, I mean, remember, not everybody jumps into a leadership position just out of nowhere. Everybody was in middle school, everybody was in high school, and then many people go to college. So you got to start somewhere, and somebody you have to take a chance on people. And one of the interesting things, though, is well, in any organization, there are the formal leaders, usually by title, and there are informal leaders. You can walk into any organization and say, who are some of the people that have uh, leadership uh, shows up in different words sometimes. Who has the most credibility in the organization? Well, or in this group, who has the most credibility? Who's the go-to person? And those are the informal leaders. And a lot of times people say, well, they don't have the title. When do you give them the chance? I believe I've seen it. There are so many cases where if you really look and you really pull it apart, or really dissect it, peel back the onion of this person, you're going to find all kinds of things that say that person is a leader. They've demonstrated in various things. And as a result of that, we're going to give them a shot. And when I talk about things that that you don't see on paper or are not in a position is, hey, just out of curiosity, how many times, if you're in a small department, can you observe one of the people just asking on a Monday, hey, how was your weekend? What did you do that was exciting? What was, was there anything that was impactful over the weekend? And they start that conversation. Or on a Friday, hey, I hope you have a great weekend. You got any big plans, anything like that? And those are the type of people that, whether they're introverts or extroverts, usually easier for extroverts, but even introverts, if they're asking questions to engage people, because remember, leadership is about people, management is about stuff, leadership is about people. If they're engaging people and asking questions, those are some of those natural leadership abilities. There are people that volunteer for stuff, say, hey, I'll help with that. And helping with that can be almost anything. How about little things, common sense, common courtesy. Somebody is walking out the door carrying something really heavy, and does somebody ask, "Hey, can I help you? Is there something that I can do?" Or do they grab and open a door? What are those things that are demonstrable that people ultimately show that they care about other people, they're considerate about other people, and they treat them with kindness? And that's one of the critically important things, is how do they relate with people? And you can observe those things
Right.
way outside of title. You can observe it in so many different ways in various interactions, but you have to be looking for it, and you have to know that that's what that is telling you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've built a couple teams myself. I've watched other people build teams, and it's interesting. Some managers, when they approach building a task team or whatever it is they're doing, they'll say, well, what were their scores? What are their quality scores? Can we review this stuff? And then other managers will take a completely different approach and say, well, here's some skills that I can't put a number on, but they show up with a smile and they take the time to get to know the team. And whenever they finish whatever I've asked them to do, whenever they finish a task, they ask, is there anything else I can do to improve upon this? And they may not have the best scores in the world, but it's that extra effort, it's that extra diligence that often, I think, gives people a chance to stand out and be selected for various things. All right, so just to change gears one last time, just to kind of wrap up this episode, I have an interesting quote here from Calvin Coolidge. He once taught, quote, "Nothing is more common than unsuccessful people with talent," close quote. And kind of the core lesson that I took is simply, it takes much more than talent to be successful in this wild world. So, Glenn, I've heard you speak on many occasions about time management, and I've loved everything you've had to share. Could you share your thoughts for me just one last time on your approach to time management?
Yeah. The one thing that we all recognize that we all have the same 24 hours. At least I think we do. I don't know if there's some time continuum out there that, or some time warp that people can go through, but we all have the same 24 hours. And one of the things that people oftentimes say is, well, I don't have time. And my perspective on that is, uh, you'll never hear me say I don't have time. I will always say it's a question of priorities. So there's a couple of things that always cross my mind when it comes to time management. If somebody tells me that they walk in and say, well, I didn't have time to get that done, I ask them, well, did you sleep last night? Because if you slept last night, then that means you prioritize sleep over what you were supposed to get done. And by the way, as a side note, everybody at work knows, don't ever say, I didn't have time to Glenn. Don't ever, ever, ever say I didn't have
They all
time
know
to me.
better.
They know better. It's just one of those things. You've been there a long time, people start knowing stuff like that. Because I truly believe everything is a question of priorities. It is truly a question of priorities. Because if you want to do something, all of us have the same 24 hours. If you want to do something, you will prioritize that. And from a time management standpoint, if you've chosen to, here's what my priorities are, you're going to get a lot more done. And so along that same line of thinking, one of the things that it's always interesting, people have said, Glenn, I really need help with time management. I'm like, okay, well, here's two thoughts for you. One, do you know what you're supposed to do? Yes. Do you know when you're supposed to have it done? Yes. Well, if you know what you're supposed to do, and you know that you're supposed to, or when you're supposed to have it done, if you don't do it, then I just really consider you lazy, because you chose or you prioritize whatever else you did over what you were supposed to do. And so those are the two biggest things, the way I think from a time management perspective. One, it's really a question of priorities. And so here's the perfect example that I give to everybody all the time. I'm pushing my late 50s now, and I will tell you that if as a almost 57-year-old man, I don't care what I'm doing. I could be talking to the president of the United States. I could be in the middle of throwing the first pitch out at the seventh game of a World Series. And if all of a sudden something on my chest starts hurting, there is nothing that is more important than my chest hurting, because usually that means maybe I'm having a heart attack. And so the absolute priority at that time is I need to see a doctor, or need to call 911 or something. So what happens is almost everything that you do, what's the priority that you have set for yourself, and are you following that? And oftentimes people just flat out say, well, I didn't have time. Okay, well, when did you know about this? 2 weeks ago. How much time do you think this would have taken you? 10 hours. So you're telling me in the last 2 weeks, you have not been able to come up with 10 hours of time to be able to accomplish this task. And what that means is your priorities are askew.
Yeah.
And what I've found out over the years, people that are high performers that do a fantastic job, those that get promoted, I mean, some people get promoted without doing this, but those that get promoted are the people that get things done, that
Right.
have the right priority system. They do what they need to do. So when somebody says, well, I can't get my college degree because I've got all these other things, like, okay, well, tell me what all those other things are. And then what you have told me then is the fact that you play video games 20 hours a week, you prioritizing video games over going to school. So
Yeah.
adult decisions, adult consequences. If you prioritize video games, then and you don't go to school, then that's your choice. But
Right.
don't say that you didn't have time. So those are my primary things that I always talk about, or always think about when people, Glenn, help me with this. I'm like, okay, this is pretty easy. And then one of the biggest things also is a standard 2x2 matrix that a lot of people talk about. What's important and what's urgent. And oftentimes, from a leadership standpoint, I will tell you, as a CEO, the most important thing that I work on are things that are important but not urgent. For example, earlier question about visioning and putting together a vision, very important. But do I have to have a vision statement today? No, it's not urgent. Where people get sideways oftentimes is they're working on things that aren't important, and they aren't urgent. Or what ends up happening is they're always working on things that aren't important, and then they're creating the sense of urgency, like, oh, I got to watch my email. Like, how many
Yeah.
people look at their phone because I gotta look at that text,
Right.
and more than likely that text is not that important, but you're creating a sense of urgency. And from a time management standpoint, when you're working on things that aren't important and they aren't urgent, then that really becomes a problem. My idea is to make sure that if something pops up, and the best example that I can use is at work, I will drop everything. And if you ever saw a senior staff meeting, that we get notifications on our phone, email, that if one of our security devices that we use at a branch, i.e., what something that we do or we use if we're getting robbed, if that goes off and we get notified, and usually it sounds like an Amber Alert in the room because everybody's phone buzzes or something.
Hmm.
And when that happens, the most important thing that we do is manage that crisis. And so
Right.
that's an urgent thing, and it's important. If it's always urgent and it's always important, that means you're usually putting out fires.
Yeah.
Ideally, to think long term, you need to be working on things that are urgent. I'm sorry, that are important but not urgent, and that's where you can get so much more done. But there are people out there that are always trying to create urgency and stuff often that isn't important, but that's the busy work.
Right.
We need to make sure we categorize our work and make sure we stay in the quadrant where things are important but they're not urgent.
So I mean that's awesome. I've got a question though, just off of
Mhm.
that. As a leader, when you're navigating your one-on-ones and your coachings with your staff, and it's clear that they prioritize things a little bit differently than you might. And let's
Mhm.
say you've given them a heavy task that you need done in a couple of days, and they
Mhm.
haven't started on it because they're concerned about a different area of their work.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
From a leadership standpoint, are you willing to negotiate that with them, or are you tough nails? What do you do
Yeah.
in those
If
situations?
if if that happened, usually I look at myself and say, I blame me,
Okay.
because if this happens often, we call it ops tempo. It's a kind of military term. How fast you're going. What's civilian side is organizational pace. One of my jobs, I should be the keeper of organizational pace. And so if there's a tasking or something that I want to get done in the organization, if I have done a poor job of establishing those expectations, as I talked about earlier, if I have done a poor job of establishing expectations, then that's how we're going to end up getting disappointed. So if somebody says, through their lenses, they were working on something that they thought was really important, and I didn't think it was as important, then I have done a poor job communicating what the importance of that particular task was. So in that case, it's go back to help me understand and tell me what you're working on and let me help you. And that's where, from a time management standpoint, that's where I do need to help and say, let me help you prioritize what needs to happen. And if there's things that I think can slip, I can push back the tasker that I have, or something else that they're doing. Happy to do that, but I really take it on myself if I have miscommunicated or usually not communicated what that expectation is, then that's really on me. And oftentimes, people, from a leadership standpoint, they do a very poor job of that, and then they want to blame the person that didn't execute on something, when in fact the primary problem was they didn't establish it in the beginning. Not only did they not establish it, they didn't even ask and say, who has the bandwidth to be able to do this? And that is something that, as the keeper of organizational pace, trying to watch out for your people so you don't burn them out. How do you have that communication? And part of that is also establishing the expectation is that I need you to tell me when you've got a number of things and you're conflicted in what needs to get done. And I've had this happen to me before, Glenn. here's my 3 things that I'm working on as part of the business priorities of the organization or the strategic objectives. Here's the 3 things that I'm working on. If you give me one more, I'm happy to do it. I just need to understand which one of these other 3 can slip, or which one can we push back. And
Right.
then I will come back and say, well, which one do you think you can push back?
Yeah.
But and that's kind of that laissez-faire leadership thinking of
Right.
which one do you think you can push back, or which one makes most sense, or which one, if you let it go now, is the least impactful on our business priorities for out of those 3 or 5 or 2 or what have you. So it's a really an open communication of them being able to say, Glenn, bandwidth is full, and help me work on that. I am glad to work on time management things with that, because it, I don't want to burn them out. At the same
Right.
time, at the executive level, if somebody is thinking that they're only going to have to work 8 hours a day, especially during ramp up periods or something big happening, that's completely different. There are times that you have to surge, and you have to work a bit harder. You know this and everything that you've done. You have to work a little bit harder and a little bit more to be able to get what needs to be done. And then the rewards for that obviously is, at some point in time, then hey, if you need a little bit of flexibility in this, a little longer lunch hours, whatever it is, break away early to go to school, then we need to be flexible with that also. But yeah, I take it upon myself if they seem to be coming up against a wall, and they can't seem to get over it, to crawl over the wall.
Well, that's good of you. And that kind of leads to just the kind of final topic I wanted to end on, which is a blend of all these different things that we've talked about.
Mhm.
I've recently heard in my own organization directors complain about how taking the time to listen to an upset team is a waste of time. It's a waste of money, a waste of resources. And I personally don't agree with that. I feel that there's a lot to be gained with the team when you take the time to listen to them. Um, One of the most influential moments of my life when it comes to leadership is I voiced a very similar concern to a significant leader in my life, that taking the time to hear out my business partner at the time, um, that I thought it was a waste of time, and that I was losing profitability, I was losing money. And the leader just looked at me and he said, Dustin, I want you to think about what you just said. And that's all it took. And it hit me that the main point of all that we do is um, is really important, and that can be different for various people. But for most of us, that is what I bring home to my family. Like, am I doing this because I want to make an impact in people's lives? And you mentioned earlier, you want to be that guy someday that people refer to in a positive light. Um, why do you go to work every day? Why do you come home in the moods that you do? You got to think about these things. And business, we can be so wrapped up in what the spreadsheet says at the end of the day that we lose out on why we do what we do. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Sure,
Is it a
sure.
waste of time to listen to a team's concerns? And at what point could it be a waste of time? I think there are a lot of managers that could benefit from some thoughts on that.
Mhm. Yeah, I truly believe you should always listen to your folks. When I say always, so you always as a starting point, because I will tell you, if you get somebody that all they do is complain about the
Yeah,
same thing over and
right.
over and over, and they are unwilling to change, then insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And if all you're doing is complaining day in, day out, or week in, week out, then that's problematic also. But sometimes, many times, there are great opportunities that you can glean. How many times have you heard people in a conversation say, the leader say, I learned more than you did, or I'm pretty sure I learned more from you than you learned from me.
Right.
Should always, one of the most fundamental basic principles of, if you want to call it customer service, member service, servant leadership, is for your people to be heard. It doesn't always mean that what they say you're going to do, and you should be clear in that expectation that, yes, I want to hear you. And then sometimes there are things that you say we just can't or won't do, but people need to be heard. And when you hear them, and if you And if you want to come back and say, here's why we can or can't, people have to understand why they want to be. They want to be part of. They just want to know. Most people want to be in the know, and if
Right.
they understand, and if you are willing to provide that understanding, incredibly helpful for the morale of the people and the fact that they were heard. I believe that you should listen to those conversations. At the same time, when you listen to those conversations and then there are action items, you don't want to have 27 action items. You say, let's parse this down. What are the three most important things that we need to work on? And then if you work on them, when you come back and you need to create that feedback loop. So I truly believe you should listen to the folks. And if at all possible, because where your best ideas come from, usually not leadership, they're coming from the people. And
Right.
so that's a two-way street that you can ask for that type of input too, and say, how are you helping to improve the customer experience, the employee experience, or creating benefit for the company? And if you listen to the staff, you're going to get some of those things. Now, if all they're doing is just complaining, I also believe from a leadership standpoint, you can say, here are my notes from the last 3 meetings. You said the same thing over and over and over, and they're not productive comments. They aren't improving the environment for the customer. They're not improving the environment for the employee, and they're not beneficial for the company.
Mm.
So how would we categorize this? And is it something, and you got to have an R-rated conversation, R for real. You just flat out tell them, this is a real call. You're complaining about something that has no bearing on employee morale, customer experience, or organizational improvement. So you've got to call it out on both sides too. So
Right.
I would say that if people, if all they're doing is complaining, and sometimes just a good complaint session is okay.
Yeah.
And then you circle back and say, you know what, there's nothing here that was actionable, but you got it off your chest. I think that
Right.
is completely appropriate, completely legitimate. And if you listen, oftentimes people will recognize that all they're doing is complaining. And
Right.
then you come full circle, but people need to be heard. Think of it this way, that oftentimes everybody at some point in time wanted to be heard. When you're 16 years old and your parents say no, you want to be heard because you have a reason why you think you should be able to do this. They have a reason why you shouldn't. You just wanted to be heard. As a kid, not necessarily ever going to agree with it, but when you're 25 years old, you're going to reflect back and say, now I know what mom and dad were really trying to do.
Right.
The workplace is just like that. Some of the best leadership principles and training there ever was parenthood.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that leadership is dealing with people. And there's one of the best leadership laboratories out there, our kids. And so when people do that, that's really important. Yes, I believe that you should listen to people. But if all they're doing is complaining, you got to shut that down also.
Yeah. Time and place.
Yes.
Definitely.
Okay.
Well, excellent, Glenn. I really appreciate you being on the podcast. Your expertise, we could listen to it all day long. I definitely would. Maybe in
Might
the
be the only
future we could have
one.
more episodes or something, but
Yes,
really appreciate your time and we appreciate
absolutely.
your thoughts, and we appreciate all the listeners, and we're grateful for your support. And this has just been another quick episode of Harnessing Contrast. So thank you very much, everybody.